You are listening to another podcast series by the Sacred Art of Living community, honoring soul-sized questions.
Hello, everyone. My name is Daryl Williams, your host for this podcast series called Soul-Sized Questions. Authentic spiritual direction ultimately will lead us into compassionate right action for others. Jack Kennedy concludes his series on spiritual discernment by challenging us to consider the ways our spiritual practices and beliefs get translated into practical ways of being in the world with others. How we are fully human is the only starting point of supporting others in the search for the divine. Ultimately, trusting rather than denying our naked experiences is the basis of spiritual direction that can transform life's deepest challenges.
What I'd like to do is just for a moment to ask us to stay in prayer. Today is more prayerful, hopefully. I'm inviting us into a more contemplative space. I still want to give some input, but my desire is to be much briefer with it and to set up some contemplative time for you and then some time both in small groups and large groups. And I consider all of it prayer. It's a way of experiencing spirit within us and spirit within each other. So I invite you to kind of let the day be prayerful as best you can. And for a moment, I'd just like you to reflect on the prayer we started with last night and let yourself do it, but in a different way, which is just being with your breathing in and your breathing out. And I'd invite you to breathe in the breath of God's compassion for you and let it travel with the oxygen wherever the oxygen goes in your system. And to breathe out anything that's toxic, that's poisonous, that's debilitating, whether it's in your mind, your heart, your gut, your spirit. Just for a moment, let the air be the breath of God's compassion in, and let what's toxic breathe out to be transformed by the breath of God. I find this way of praying a powerful image for me for what spiritual direction is all about. That when I'm sitting in direction, not directing, but being with a director, I want to breathe in the compassion of God from that director, and I'm hoping that my breathing out what is toxic. I don't want to just breathe out what's toxic. I want to share what's grace and blessing in me too. But I also think the role of the director sometimes is just to breathe in somebody else's pain and to keep breathing back out love and compassion. So just how you let yourself breathe and be aware of it when you're sitting with somebody. I think even just that phrase, we need to take time to breathe, has a much deeper meaning than just breathing. It's about the breath of God continually transforming us and the rest of our world and our universe. So I'm hoping today to say a few things about spiritual direction and to invite you into a little bit of work. And I want to use a couple of phrases with you this morning. For both the director and the directee, spiritual practice leads to praxis, or the spiritual path is not an authentic path. What do I mean by that? Praxis is right action. Praxis is where theory, contemplation of reality, not the contemplation of unreality, but really the way life is for me, for us, moves to right, just, compassionate, loving action in some way. If it doesn't do that, it's a fantasy. It's a nice trip. Or maybe it's a painful trip, but it doesn't leave anywhere. if it doesn't lead to praxis. Praxis is a word that comes out of liberation theology that says we can sit here and pray with Scripture all we want to feel good, or to find a way just to hole up in life and get through life, or do we really let Scripture do what Scripture's meant to do, which is to call us into praxis, and that our praxis ought to be informed by our Scripture. So I let the Scripture draw me into who I want to be and how I want to be involved in my life. What does it say to you when you read, say, in the Christian Scriptures, whenever you did it to the least of these, you do it to me? In living that out, that's praxis. It's making a difference. Something is happening out here. And we're all called, I believe, in spiritual direction to that change, to authentic spirituality. And it's not authentic if it doesn't lead to praxis. It doesn't impact the world in some way. I want to bring up the Pharisees. Why was Jesus so down on the Pharisees? They did religious practices. They had a practice. But their practice is what they thought was going to save them, rather than their practice was to open them up to enter into the world, to be loving, compassionate human beings. So it depends on the direction that we're moving in terms of our spiritual practice. And so hopefully it's what opens you up in some way. Thomas Merton, who was a monk, I remember, I think we read, I don't know if we read it or I read it recently in an article about how an activist was totally ticked off at Thomas Merton because he was off praying all the time. And yet he kept reading Thomas Merton, and Thomas Merton was contemplating in his prayer the transformation of the world, and his writings helped that activist totally step into the world. And he thanked Thomas Merton because Thomas Merton was living out praxis by his writings and his own inner transformation, because his heart was for the world. I do have a poem I want to read. This time I marked down the page number. And this is from Hafiz. He was born 1320. He lived in Shiraz, which is South Persia, which I assume is somewhere in Turkey, in that area. Would that be? Iran? Okay. He called himself the memorizer. I think that's what Hafiz means, because he actually was one of those people that memorized the whole Quran and could recite it from memory. In the book here, they said he was called the tongue of the invisible, because he so loved God and he was able to speak so articulately. And he had great names for God: sweet uncle, generous merchant, friend, beloved. He had problem solver and problem giver. I like that one. Anyway, here's one of his poems. It says, "Once a man came to me and spoke for hours about his great visions of God he felt he was having. He asked me for confirmation, saying, 'Are these wondrous dreams true?' I replied, 'How many goats do you have?' He looked surprised and said, 'I am speaking of sublime visions, and you ask about goats?' And I spoke again, saying, 'Yes, brother, how many do you have?' 'Well, Hafiz, I have 62. "'And how many wives?' Again he looked surprised and said, 4. "'How many rose bushes in your garden? How many children? Are your parents still alive? Do you feed the birds in winter?' And to all he answered. And then I said, 'You asked me if I thought your visions were true. I would say that they were if they make you become more human, more kind to every creature and plant that you know.'" Praxis. And when I answer your question about visions from God, I'm going to ask you about how do you treat other people? How are you in your life? The title of the poem was Becoming Human. There are 2 prerequisites, or my language, that they're ongoing requisites. I guess requisite is a word, isn't it? I don't know if it is. 2 prerequisites are the director's self-awareness and the director's interior freedom. And that's what I'm going to work toward with you today, is your own becoming aware of what's in your well. If you look into your well, what's going on in there? What lives there? What do you uncover in the darkness? What do you bring into the light? What is it that gets in your way of fully being who you are? Why do you want to do that? As a director, the reason you want to be self-aware and have interior freedom is in order to stay with the directee's experience and be attentive to God during the direction session. You want to be able to stay there. And I know in my own life, my own issues, my family of origin issues, some other issues that come up in me have often made me step back, made me afraid, got me preoccupied. I end up projecting sometimes onto other people some of my own images of who God is, rather than exploring theirs with them or making suggestions. So the director's primary goal is to help individuals grow or be sustained in a personal relationship with God. Now, I'm using God language because that's my language. You might phrase that differently for yourself. And please do that in terms of your understanding of the divine or the language you use for that in some way. But it is about relationship. Hopefully, we've said several times, I want to keep saying that the difference between therapy and spiritual direction is therapy is somehow about trying to fix it or to cure it or to heal it. Spiritual direction is about what's your relationship like with God, and how is this stuff helping you be in relationship or not? Not that you get rid of it, but is there any way that you can let God be with you in who you are in some way? You know yourselves that you all have relationships, and you continue to be in relationship, and you probably can name where you're still broken. That doesn't get in the way of relationship if it's out in the light somehow. As Leonard Cohen says, there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in some way. So an assumption that I think is really an important one is the director themselves are on a path or growing or being sustained in their personal relationship with God. So are you growing or being sustained in your own relationship? What's that like for you? How are you with that? How do you be with that? What are your practices that move you to the praxis of being able to sit and be with someone with their own experience? Are you able to sit and be with your own experience? Are there parts of it that you're ashamed of, or you don't want to hold into the light of your own awareness? Or you find hard to accept or embrace because it's broken, or it's not together, or it's embarrassing, or it's still in process, or it's whatever, the words you put on your own experience in some way. So what that brings me to and back to is what Richard put up last night. I want to take a couple of minutes with this. I'm going to actually ask us to work with this morning in your contemplation time and in your sharing time, is with some of these principles, the Sufi principles of spiritual direction. I'm going to comment on each of them very briefly, and then I want to move us into how we might step into the practice of this in some ways. So, need for faithful guide and community. That's why we ask you to be in direction. That's why we hope you rely on your community. That's why I am in direction. That's why I need community in some place, I need guidance. I need support. I need being held, not somebody trying to change me even, but helping me not so much try to change myself that I can't embrace myself and be with it long enough to find God in there somehow in my own experience. So I need somebody who will help me with that and bring it into the light or reflect back to me what they hear in a way where I go, oh, I didn't think of that. Thanks for saying that. That's helpful. We are very good at that, most of us, if we listen and hold somebody else's experience. The second one is trust your experience. That, again, has been my journey. Now, maybe that's all of our journeys. I know that in sitting with someone in direction, I very often find that I am the one who, by holding someone else's experience, I can hold it better than they can. because they have shame around it, or fear, or guilt, or all that stuff that comes up in us. I ain't putting all that and any of that down. It's just real. But can we hold it enough to bring it at least into the light, to discern what does it mean for me? There's a difference between my experience and what I interpret it to mean to me, or what I want to listen to in that experience, and I want to bring it out to light, but I don't have to deny my experience. Even the phrase, "come on, cheer up," denies somebody else's experience. Oh, cheer up, that's not a big deal. Well, I mean, what's that do inside of you? I mean, that's a put down, and boy, that angers me right away. Because for me it is. Trust your experience. So I, as a director, need to trust. If you tell me you have fear that's an intensity of a 9 and it's paralyzing you, and I'm going, "oh, come on, you got a lot of strength," I don't think you're going to come back. I may want to reflect back also later on the strength I see in you. But right now what you need is somebody to hear, "wow, your fear is that intense? It really is paralyzing for you, isn't it?" Well, can we hold that out here for a while? And I mean, I won't go on with where I might go with that. But there is also to teach the way of surrender. I also want to read again from Hafiz. This is a poem called Dividing God. The moon starts singing when everyone is asleep, and the planets throw a bright robe around their shoulders and whirl up close to her side. Once I asked the moon, "why do you and your sweet friends not perform so romantically like that to a larger crowd?" And the whole sky chorus resounded, "The admission price to hear the lofty minstrels speak of love is affordable only to those who have not exhausted themselves dividing God all day and thus need rest. The thrilled tavern fiddlers who are perched on the roof do not want their notes to intrude upon the ears where an accountant lives with a sharp pencil keeping score of words, another in their great sorrow or sad anger may have once said to you. Hafiz knows the sun will stand as your best man and whistle when you have found the courage to marry forgiveness, when you have found the courage to marry love." To surrender to that in some way. Let go of dividing God. And that poem speaks to me just from the video we watched last night, how we try to divide God in some way. This is our God, or this is our part of God, and it's what causes so much pain in our lives in some way. Then the practice of marifat, is that how that's pronounced, Richard? Contemplation. Again, we're called to contemplate. That's what I'm going to call you to today, but it's to contemplate reality. I think we're going to, I don't think we've read Parker Palmer yet. I can't remember which year we've did that, but he talks about real contemplation that disillusions you. You want to be disillusioned, or do you want to be illusioned? And that whole thing of here's my situation. Here's where I am. Here's who I am right now. And I look at and all of that. And I can stand before God in all of my nakedness, knowing God isn't ashamed of any of it. It has been a powerful prayer experience for me to contemplate the look of God when God looks at me naked. And I mean that physically, emotionally, psychologically, just stripped and there. To look into those eyes and not see shame, and to see what I see. When I look into God's eyes, when I close my eyes, I don't know why I do, because I always see warmth and affection, even when I'm feeling ashamed of myself. And for me, that's powerful, because I think I did tell you that one time when I was a kid dancing, and dance was big in my life. My brothers were dancing naked, and my mother shamed that out of her culture. So for me to stand and realize that God doesn't shame me, that's contemplation to me. That's so real. And in that, though, I'm looking at what I consider my nakedness that I don't want God to see. I've got to say, here, I'm going to let you see what I'm ashamed of in some way. And finally, faithfulness to your path. Oh, I'm sorry, I laid something right on top of that. And that takes some discipline. Is what path are we on in some way? What are we called to? So I'm going to invite you to this faithfulness to your path. I'm going to use that image today with you. And I'm going to ask you to reflect on your path by moving into some holy listening. As one of the readings we did around holy listening, I want this morning and this whole weekend to be about your holy listening, but I want your holy listening, first of all, to be listening to what wells up in you when you have the time to contemplate. I do want you then to listening to what welled up in other people, wholly listen to them in a way that's helpful when you go into your groups with each other. But we're going to take the whole morning to move easily through this, so you have plenty of time for both of this. So I want to use the image of Conroy's book to invite you to spend some time looking into the well of your personal faith relationship. I want you to listen to yourselves, and I want you to listen to yourself again in the words of Hafiz. How do I listen? And although this is about others, I want you to think of this as how you listen to yourself also. How do I listen to others? As if everyone were my master speaking to me his cherished last words. Can you listen to yourself that way? Can you take what you hear and cherish it, hold it as your cherished last words? That's how important your own inner experience is and the language you give to it.
Jack Kennedy is a special mentor to the Sacred Art of Living Center. If you would like to hear more of his wisdom on this subject, consider participating in one of our online 30-day retreat experiences. You can join others from your own home and at your own pace to benefit from the art of discernment in your everyday life. Go to our website, sacredartofliving.org, to learn more about these virtual retreat programs.